This week on Overtime, we talk about all things gifting. We talk about the gifts of the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teachers. This is one you want to make sure that you check out, like, subscribe. Let's get it.
Welcome to Center City Overtime, a weekly podcast where we take a little more time to dive into Sunday's message. And I'm really excited about this one. This is what we call our APEST message. If you don't know what that means, you will know by the end of our conversation. But we are talking all about gifts and the way that God has gifted each person. And joining us on the couch tonight, we have Sherry Evans-Beaumont returning. It's been a couple months now. Yeah, give it up. Sherry and Tony are some of our elders. She's been part of Center City for 14 years and shared on the gift of the prophetic gift this Sunday, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. It's nice to have you back. And joining us for the first time, we have Aaron Quate. Yeah, give it up for Aaron. Aaron and his wife, Samantha, have done a little bit of everything. You've been group leaders. They led the hiking group, which was one of my favorites in theory, and then always there was a time going up where I was like, why am I in this group?
You weren't the only one.
and you have been on the welcome table team and helping people get into the community and meet people and get connected, and you're getting ready to step into a new role in life as a father. So
That's right.
Yeah, we're excited.
June 20th is the due date, so we're really excited.
Yeah, getting close.
Yeah.
Getting close. Yeah, you can do it, Sam. It's getting warmer, but you'll get there. Well, it is so good to have everyone here tonight, and I thought the first thing that we could do would just be to go kind of down the line and share what your gifts are, maybe your top or your top two, just so people are kind of aware then as we get into the discussion, and we've already got questions coming in, so this will be a good one.
Let's go.
So we'll start with Aaron.
Yeah, so I think my gifting is more of the shepherd and the teacher. I think it's sometimes hard to know exactly what your gifting is, but sometimes it's almost easier to know what your gifting is not. And so I think there's a couple of them that I'm like, yeah, that's definitely not me. And then I think shepherd and teacher are both two that have kind of come back when I've had conversations with my wife, Sam. And I think if I had to choose one, I would lean more towards the shepherd kind of role, because I think Pastor John shared in his message on Sunday that the one word for shepherd was care, and that was something that really resonated with me. And so I think it's something that is really at the heart of what Sam and I do at the church, is that we really legitimately do care about the people who are here. And so again, that's something that I thought resonated with me. So yeah, shepherd would be mine.
Now,
Awesome.
You're not on the stage, so you are by no stretch of the imagination have to answer this, but are you also a shepherd? I figured.
So we talked about that
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon, just how great it is that we both have that
Yeah.
gifting that lines.
It does. It lines up well. It does. And for those who are watching and maybe can't hear her, she does share in that gift of the shepherd. And I've seen the way that the both of you have navigated that, even when people don't see. It's beyond Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron and Samantha are usually one of the first people when somebody's in need to jump on a meal train, or to call and find out who's doing a meal train, or to seek after people when they're hurting. We've had a couple interactions where it's like, hey, Pastor John, have you seen this person? And that's very much a mark of a shepherd, when you notice someone from the flock is out. So I appreciate that gift and the way that you guys have utilized that in our community for sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
What about you, Pastor John?
So my top two, apostolic and shepherding. And so we'll talk in depth a little bit more as we kind of break this down a little bit, but I do believe that some of that is shifted. But over the last several years, that gifting of the apostolic, or the gifting of the apostle, has really kind of shown itself and developed in my life. I think some of that is because of the season God was preparing me for in leadership here. But the shepherd has been a consistent mark of gifting in my life.
Yeah. As someone who works on your team, I can definitely affirm that I see that shepherding gift in you,
Oh, thank you.
and appreciate that a lot. I also have shepherding as my top gift. That's not true of every pastor, but it's true of a lot of pastors. Like some translations use the word pastor.
Yeah.
For shepherd. And my second one, I've always seen as evangelist, but it's kind of, and we'll kind of get into what this means, but in this particular season, I'm actually seeing the teacher come out a little bit more and kind of both of those interacting. But then I am the person, if I find a really good sale or something, I want everyone in my life to know. So, so I don't just share about Jesus, I share about all good things. So yeah, shepherd, evangelist, a little bit of teaching in there.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, this might surprise y'all, but prophetic.
Yeah. Hopefully you were here on Sunday and you know that, yeah.
And then also teaching, I think, is another that's right up in there. Those are the two things that I just can't not do.
Yeah.
If there's something that has to be said, it's probably going to be said. I can't not teach people. And there's some evangelism in there too, depending on the season.
Yeah, I would affirm that. I don't know why you need affirmation, but
I'll
I mean, it's
bring
kinda what we're
all
doing
the
tonight.
affirmation you want.
I mean
Good shepherding.
the prophet, the gift of the prophet is what you lean on, and I could see the teaching, but I've also seen the evangelism in the way that you've kind of bring people along, which I love, and I think those gifts work well together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we just got this question in, and it's one that I had kind of started to bring up and one that I prepared. So we're just going to go there. Can your gift change throughout your life?
So, maybe for the sake of the rest of this conversation, we give a little bit of baseline, so that maybe for those who are watching or those in the room who weren't here Sunday, didn't hear the message all the way through. What we're speaking about specifically comes out of Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 through 12-ish. And the conversation Paul's having with the church of Ephesus is really about what Jesus' heart was for the church. And he basically says that the world, that he might fill the entire universe with himself. And the way that he fills the entire universe in himself is these gifts that he gives through the generosity of Christ to each of us, his church, right? And it's the gift of the prophet, the gift of the evangelist, the gift of the shepherd, the gift of the teacher, the gift of the apostle. And then it's the responsibility of us as believers to walk in that gifting in order that the world will see a clear and full picture of Jesus. Now, with that said, for my book nerds in the room, or maybe who are watching who are like,
Woo woo, book
that
nerds.
sounds great, I want to know more. A lot of our kind of, for further research, Alan Hirsch has written a phenomenal book called 5 Qs, and really breaks down the idea of these giftings and how they show themselves in the church. It is a strong read. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. If you're not like into reading, this isn't necessarily a page turner. But you really do. He does a phenomenal job breaking down how each of these gifts show us a full picture of who Jesus is. Very similar to what Paul would say, the way that the body collectively, although gifted in different ways, we are collectively of one, and ultimately the objective is to reflect the glory of Jesus. So in Alan's writing, and there's a couple schools of thought on this. In Alan's writings, talking like I know the guy, but in Alan Hirsch's writings, he does say that there are moments and seasons of life where some of those giftings do change. I would argue, for me personally, I tend to lean on that thinking, because even in myself, there was a season when I would argue, and most around me would argue, my gift sets was a strong evangelist, like that gift of the evangelist was really strong. As I have maturated and have moved into different seasons of leadership, I just think out of the grace and goodness of God, there has been some shifting and movement in that. I've become more of a shepherd over the years. That apostolic has always kind of been there. And I have, I see that evident in other people's lives. I do believe out of the grace of God, there are times where that changes, seasons where those things shift.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense because God equips us for what we need in a season, and our seasons can change and look really different. One of the things I've noticed, so we talked about this today, because most of us, like the process of figuring out your gift takes discernment and prayer and conversation with people that you love. But there are people on the internet who have quizzes. And so in the office today, we all took the quiz just to see what it came up. And none of us got the results that we thought that we were. So I will just say that as like a warning. Don't let quizzes define what you think your spiritual gift is. This is way deeper than 25 answers online. But one of the things that it brought up in our conversation was sometimes your primary gift tends to be the same. Like, it's just the way that you operate in the world. So for me as a shepherd, I didn't actually think I was a shepherd until I spent time thinking about it, because it's so second nature that, like, I just assumed everyone else was that way. And it was surprising for me to find out they were different. But then, like, beyond that one, I feel like it can be different week to week. It's definitely been different, like when I lived overseas and was working on the field versus being here in my hometown, working here at Center City. So yeah, I would say there's definitely change, but also don't think there's something wrong with you if you see consistency in that.
Yeah, I would maybe add that, there's so many other spots in Scripture where we're commanded to teach one another, to care for one another. Like, I may not have a really strong shepherding gift. It doesn't really exempt me from signing up for the
that's a
meal
great
trains.
Yeah. Even evangelism, or like
Yeah.
you're not off the hook from telling people about Jesus.
Yeah, it's a very good
If
example.
that's not your natural gift. Yeah, that's a great
that
point.
is a challenge when you navigate gifts. I think even every time, like, people are like, hey, I took the Myers-Briggs, or I took, what's the other popular one that everybody did for a little while? The Enneagram. And they're like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but I'm a number 3. No, you're a jerk, and you're a number 3. Like, there's some wisdom in saying that these gifts should never be excuses to exclude our responsibilities as believers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any thoughts you want to share? You don't have to, but
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think I would ever have the apostolic gift, so I hate new ideas. They stress me out. Like, it's like one of the least, Sam knows, it's one of my least favorite things in the world, so I don't know. God's working on all of us, but I don't know about that one.
I love it.
now that you've said it publicly, you're going to have like the next new big idea. We'll wait and see.
Look, but me and Don Patterson, we did the golf tournament, so
Yeah,
we can,
there you
we can
go.
work
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've seen even in examples like that, but although you may not be the idea guy, you're quick to line up to support the idea.
Yeah. I'll support the idea, and definitely open to it. But there's always this little thing in my chest. I'm like, I don't know about that. But definitely. I think there's other people with better giftings who, if they are idea
Different
people,
giftings.
different
Not better,
giftings,
different.
different
Just
giftings.
laying it out there.
But I think that's why we all need different people.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
absolutely. So this question, I'm kind of going to direct towards you as the apostolic one, but someone said apostles are expanders and evangelists are influencers. Both bring people into the family of Christ. So how are they most different from each other? And like, does an apostle also have to be an evangelist?
So let's first talk about the difference. I think of sometimes apostles are more in love with the idea than they're in love with people grabbing a hold of the idea. So the tension a lot of times here, by the way, there are tensions between these gifts, and they're by design. If a church is filled with apostles, there's a new idea every 4 seconds, and no shepherds to care for the people that those new ideas produce. If the room is filled with shepherds, there's nobody trying to figure out how to get new sheep in the flock. So, but that tension is there naturally, and even some of the tension in me has been that I have this gifting and thought of the apostle, and yet there's this also thing of a shepherd in me that I'm trying to, and in my head, just so you know, a little insight in the Pastor John's head, there's this great idea, and I'm like, but can our people do it? Is it gonna burn anybody out? We gotta make sure that we're ready. So there's some of that tension, and I think that's beautiful. But again, I think between the apostolic and the evangelist is really not concerned with creating new opportunities. It's just when they find it, they're quick to bring people to it. and they're obsessed with I want you to see and be a part of. I love the illustration with the evangelist of the food, because it's like, I just tasted this cake and it was great, and now I'm not even fulfilled at how good this cake is unless I share it with somebody that they can affirm how good this thing is. That's the driving of evangelists. And apostles like, hey, how many new cakes can we produce? Can we figure out how to make this cake into something we can sell at all these grocery stores? Like, there's just that new idea, and that's their drive. So I don't know if that helps, but that to me is a distinction between the two.
Yeah, I thought that was really helpful. I, like Aaron, the gift of the apostle makes me a little stressed out, but that's why I'm thankful that you're leading us. I learned a long time ago to say long runway. I need a long runway to think about new ideas, and it's been helpful that way. So yeah, if any of you are asking these questions and you have follow-ups, feel free to just submit the follow-up if it didn't answer exactly how you want to. But we will move on for now to any advice for people who anxiously look for their purpose and have a hard time trusting the process and the time that it can sometimes take?
I would start with the argument, and this is something that we've kind of hold dear. I think we spend way too much time looking for purpose, like that purpose is somehow uniquely different in every person. I don't believe that. I believe there is one purpose collectively for us as a church. For those of you who are children of God, like his purpose is defined your purpose is defined for you, and we all share that purpose. So when you look throughout Scripture, often what you find is that purpose is really clearly defined. So we find ourselves, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? What we should be asking ourselves is, what is my gifting? How's God equipped me to accomplish that purpose? And I think it's an important distinction, because again, we become a little bit obsessed culturally with the idea of, well, I got to find my purpose, and it becomes very like inward focused and to some degree selfish. We know what the purpose is. It's been outlined, right? Going to all excuse me, my voice is a little crazy this afternoon. But he tells us that we're, to go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. He turns around and says, go wait for my Holy Spirit that will come and empower you to be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So we know that collectively, I don't care who you are, or, if you call yourself a child of God, that is purpose. Mm-hmm. Now, there also can be a little tension and anxiety in trying to figure out what your gifting is also. So, as it pertains to that anxiety, I think when it comes to giftings, you just have to work the process and be okay with taking time to try to figure out what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good, it's not an easy, answer if someone's stressed about that, but it is true. Trust the process, and trust that God is working.
Yeah. That's what I was going to maybe add, is that when we think about these kinds of topics, often we're thinking about maybe someone who's trying to choose a college major, or, some big life decision, like, what's my purpose? Should I go this way? Should I go that way? There's this overarching purpose that John just mentioned, and we pray, we listen to God. If all that's in line, then God will use whatever one you pick.
Absolutely.
If you're supposed to be a nurse and you went to mechanic school, you didn't just foil God's plans, right? God gives you some freedom. If you went to mechanic school, he will use you as a mechanic, And so
yeah, I
think some of it is trusting God, trusting that purpose, even though it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been really helpful just to have somebody to talk to about this, and to be able to trying to figure out, what is my gifting? And I think it's okay too to kind of think that maybe you have one or two, or multiple ones, just to kind of get started. And like I said, maybe, all right, we can filter some of these out, and then be able to, through conversations with people, just try to figure out kind of what your purpose is, particularly if they're, in this environment where they know what the other giftings are. But even if, someone maybe hasn't heard John's sermons, or knows about, APEST, you can still kind of, ask about, hey, do I do this? Do I do that? Just to kind of give you a little bit of clarity into maybe what your gifting is.
I also think that because of the nature, and if these gifts are given to the church collectively, and we believe that they're not only given to the church, but they're given to each of us, and we're trying to figure out where that fits. I also believe that wiring happened while he was forming you in your mother's womb, right? Because he's an intentional God. When you're driving your car, you know when you're in the right gear because you're not hearing the clutch scream. I think in that season of experiment and exploration, there are moments where you'll just know this is not it. And what you're looking for is, what is it? Where does it fit? Like, oh, now I'm in second gear and I'm going the right, like you can hear the engine purr the right way. I would say that's really kind of the way that you navigate gifting sometimes when you're trying to figure out, is this the right gear? And some of that comes through volunteering and attempting. There's some things that you'll immediately knock out. Like, I'm like, I clam up around people instantly. Like, I don't know what to do. There's probably a good chance you're not showcasing that gift of the evangelist. But there are moments where sometimes you just have to try things out, and it's okay. I love what you said, because I do feel like sometimes the best way to figure this out is to ask some people that you really trust. I had a conversation with someone today. I was like, what's your gifting? They said, no, I'm a prophet, but I never saw that in myself. I'm like, fool, I could have told you that when you were like 12. Like, it is obvious in you. But, it's good to have people you can trust that can speak into that.
Yeah, so we have someone who asked a really good question that has come up a lot in different times we've taught this. Is there a difference between these spiritual gifts from Ephesians 4 and the ones mentioned in 1 Corinthians?
Yeah, that's a
And
great...
Romans 2 has some, right? I think
They
there are
do.
3 places that Paul lists gifts.
So it all depends who you read, like, quite honestly. What I would say, what I would put out is, I do believe that there are other gifts that the Spirit gives us, but many times those gifts operate within the context of this APES model. So, for instance, the gift of hospitality, which is mentioned in one of these passages, the gift of hospitality usually is within the scope of a shepherd's gifting. That makes sense? So if you do a little bit of work, what you'll find is many of those spiritual gifts actually line up with the APES giftings that are found here in Ephesians.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Any other?
I would say the same thing about talents too. Like, there's some, because we also have, well, John, I'm just talented in this way. I'm a worshiper, or I'm talented as a financial guru. So I look at numbers and they just come alive.
You're talking about me on that one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But those giftings, those talents often will fall in line. There's, not always, but there are times where you talk to people who are really good with numbers, and they tend to have a little bit of a prophetic bent to them, because 1 + 1 is always 2. It's never 3, it'll never be 4, it's always 2. And sometimes that's that bending. Sometimes people who see numbers really well, like that's a talent, are also shepherds because they're trying to help other people understand. Teachers, because they can sit. So again, those talents that I believe that God has given each and every one of us will also normally, you will find them coming alive within the context of the APES giftings.
Yeah, that's good. So this question goes back to what we were talking about before, so I want to just hit it before we've totally moved on. But they ask, if you feel like you're in the wrong place or you're in the wrong gear in this season of life, and that you might be hindering your gifting, how do you slam the brakes to get into the right gear? Or do you slam the brakes?
Yes.
I don't know about how to drive a manual. So I'm like,
Yeah, you don't hit the brakes. You hit the clutch normally, right? And you set for a season of reset. So reset seasons are never difficult. I would argue that the best way to reset.
never difficult?
I mean, sorry. It's been a long day.
Yeah, just
I'm about to put this podcast
they're
in
almost
neutral.
always difficult in my experience.
Yes, seasons of reset are always difficult, or almost always difficult. And it's okay to sit in neutral before you slam brakes. And all that neutral means is that I'm continuing in the same direction. I'm just considering some things. Because ultimately, if your purpose is right, we're still going in the same direction, God is honored
Yeah.
and patient, which is an attribute of God that we often talk about, but we often don't trust in. Like, he's patient. So there are moments where I know people get excited and they're like, oh, I'm changing careers, changing paths, changing jobs, changing locations, changing cities, changing wardrobes. I don't know, but just changing everything. And I do think that we hit the brakes instead of popping it in neutral. And it's okay to, hear me, take your time. Take your time, specifically in different seasons of life. Because in different seasons, listen, if you're 19, 20 years old in this room, and you're saying, oh, I kind of felt I was this, but I'm this, I'm saying, pop that clutch. Like, let's go. You're not, but I got 2 or 3 kids, I got a pension, I got a house, I got to figure some of that out. It's okay for that to take time. I think sometimes we romanticize the jump off the cliff, burn the boat. And I love that attitude, and I think it's necessary to take big risks, but I think it's just as much to take a risk when you've done the work and the homework to figure out what you're risking. So it's okay to pop that thing to neutral for a little while.
Yeah, do any of you guys have any stories that come to mind when you have kind of had to go through a reset in this way? You may not, but it just seems like might be helpful.
I just know having a baby on the way, you just like, I don't really know what that next gifting will be or what that'll look like. I think, and it might be something with you guys here at the church. It might continue to be that shepherding relationship, but what that'll be at home, I just don't know, to be totally honest. But I think that's okay. Like, you just, you need to be, I guess, open and to seeing what God has for you. And maybe I don't have what I need right now, but he's going to give that to me as I get, experience and repetition, and, you have your successes and failures. But yeah, I think not necessarily, I think I've kind of always been a shepherd up to this point, but I think this next stage is pretty big. And so I don't really know what that'll mean for me and if that'll change. But yeah, I think we just got to be open.
Yeah.
Well, and I think sometimes, God calls us also to things that often line up with our gifts, but might not. How often does Paul talk about being an earthen vessel, right? And just taking delight in his weaknesses, so that if there's good, that it's just glorifying God. Like, Aaron may not want to be apostolic, but if he's called to a role like that, and he's still not super strong in it, then when he knocks it out of the park, we're going to be like, wow, did you see what God did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I was in this position towards the end of my time living in Asia. In order to keep a visa in the country where I was, I needed to basically start and run my own business, and was kind of pushed into a very apostolic role without not a lot of time to process. And I remember just feeling unsettled all the time, but I didn't do anything about it, because I was also like, God clearly worked to bring me to this place. Like, I want to be faithful. This is what my leadership is saying. This is what I'm hearing. And in his grace, I came home and then never got a visa to be able to go back. And it was traumatic at the time. Like, again, these reset seasons are very rarely easy, and this was not. But I can look back on that now and see God being like, oh, well, you didn't actually respond when in your spirit you sensed that this wasn't the right thing, but he still made sure that I didn't get too far along in that way. And now I'm in a role where I am shepherding, and just it suits me a lot better than I ever would have imagined. So be encouraged that also, even if it's like a Jonah situation and you end up in a whale, or in my case, in the heart monitor, God's not going to let you like totally screw up if you are trying to be open and available to him. It just might be a little painful.
Yeah, I would also just encourage the idea here that although there has been shifts, if you're shifting every week, you're probably just not hitting the right gear. Mm-hmm. I do believe that there may be a one shift in you as the season changes, but every season doesn't mean a different shift. Because I think sometimes that could create anxiety also, right? Like, oh, we're about to buy a new house. Maybe my gifts are supposed to be shifting. Like, I would argue that you might see a shift once in your life. I don't think you're going to see shifts every new season.
And mine wasn't a shift in my gifting. It was me not being obedient.
There you go.
So like the shift was in my obedience and
Yeah.
sensitivity to what the Spirit was saying. So I really like this question. For each gifting, how can it best be used to share the gospel?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, good thinking. Anyone want to start with their primary gift?
I feel like
Looking
you
at
all
you,
are
Aaron.
looking at me,
Yeah.
so I guess
Well,
I'll
I'm
start.
always kind of faced this way. I have to shift a lot.
Yeah, so I thought I might get a question like that before we started. So like, I just kind of, so something I'll do, and I don't do it all the time, and obviously like, we all have our failures and those sorts of things. But one of the things I'll do whenever I feel like I'm getting frustrated with someone or I'm like losing my ability to stay patient, I'll just remind myself I'm speaking to a child of God. Like this human being literally right in front of me was created in the image of God. And that's something that I'll do then. It just kind of like helps me to completely reset on what I'm doing. And honestly, when I do that, everything else just kind of falls into place. I don't have to think about, this is X, Y, and Z, what I need to do. Although those things can be helpful, but like for me, it's just kind of like resetting and just being able to, look at somebody and just be like, oh yeah, you were created in the image of God. And it's really simple, but I think it's also really powerful and helps me to reset.
Yeah, that's great. What about the prophetic?
I think, so it's not like the evangelist necessarily. It's often a detailed kind of conversation that you end up having in the prophetic space. So just a few verses down, like 2 inches down from where APEST is actually kind of laid out, it talks about speaking the truth in love. And while that's probably applicable to all the gifts, like if you do the prophetic gift without truth in love, you're just going to make damage. And so it's I often do kind of what Aaron was talking about, like, I see you, I see you, I see you. Like, you are a valuable human being, and I am going to go talk to you about a thing, but it's in love, and it's not, none of these gifts are for our own benefit.
Right.
They're all outward facing. Because it'd be a lot easier to not do this, to be quite honest. Well, I don't know. I can't not, so what are you going to do? But, to come from a motivation of love, like, I'm going to tell you this because, maybe we have a shared love of an organization, or I love you as an individual, what have you. I want you to be better. I want you to hear what God has been laying on my heart for you. And so...
Yeah, I would also say just having seen your life over the past decade plus, which is crazy, I have seen people who don't have a relationship with the Lord, who have a friendship with you, learn to trust your voice and your prophetic gift, operate in that way of being trustworthy when they are in a season of illness or job loss or just a lot of different things. And interestingly, also hospitality has gone along with this a lot. Sherry has hosted a lot of people over the years who needed someone to love and just open up a home to them. But I could see that in the prophetic gifting, specifically if this question was like, how do you use this to share the gospel with people who don't know the goodness of God, that being that trustworthy friend, having that wisdom that is supernatural. I've seen that play out in people's lives. Yeah.
I think some of it is, especially when it comes to sharing the gospel, like, at least in my own experiences, I cannot go up to a stranger and beat them over the head with it. So some of it is just like earning the right to speak truth into someone's life. I can't walk up to most people and be like, oh my God, you're a hot mess. You need Jesus. Can we pray now?
Have you tried it?
There's been a couple times I've been thought about it.
T-shirt design?
I'm down.
So, it is kind of that building the relationship over time and so on.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. Was someone saying something? Maybe not. Maybe I'm just hearing things.
Thought I heard something too.
Okay.
No, that was it for me.
Well, I feel like Evangelist is like the most straightforward because that's that come and see personality, just always having that that idea of wanting to invite people into what is good and being in relationship with God and knowing how much he loves us is the best thing ever. So that comes kind of naturally. The shepherding, I'm very similar to you. Teaching, feel free to jump in since you've got that gift too. In a lot of ways, I think that comes out in the context of sharing the gospel because if you have a teaching gift, you can make complicated things simple. And so it's easier to talk about some of these things that can be these really big ideas in ways that people connect with and understand. So I see that coming out that way sometimes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, keep making the complicated simple is something that Pastor John said in his sermon, and I think that's perfect because I think a lot of times we tend to overcomplicate God and what he means to us and all these sorts of things. But at a base level, who he is to us is, creator, savior, those sorts of things. It can be really simple, and that can be a great place to just reset and start from there.
Yeah. It can also be really kind of valuable to help remove barriers, the philosophical, lack of understanding. People mix up quotes from the Bible and Benjamin Franklin,
Yeah.
To be like, nope, that one wasn't from God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or some of the apologetics and be like, nah, Jesus was real. Here, I only help you understand that, right? Like, it just removes those barriers that make it seem less of a crazy idea, maybe to somebody who doesn't know Jesus.
Yeah.
So.
And for the gifts of the apostolic, the way that the gospel is shared is through new ideas and new approaches, and really most of that gifting is kind of almost obsessed with saying, how do I take these other giftings that are around me and best utilize what God is doing in us collectively in new ways. But I do think that all of us in every gift, that's why I love that question so much. In every one of those gifts, it all should point to a relationship with Jesus. Now, how you do that, a shepherd's probably going to love a person into the kingdom. The prophet is going to reveal a person into the kingdom. We see that in Jesus. That conversation Jesus has with the woman at the well is very prophet gifting showcased. This is who you are, this is what's happening, this is the reality of it, I'm the Messiah, and kind of lays it all out. The apostolic, again, the building of a new thing. But all of us need to have an answer when asked, right? So you love a person, you're shepherding that person. When they ask the question, what about Jesus? What's your answer? When you're approached as a prophet in that revelation and the question becomes, how do I know? You need to have that answer for what about Jesus? That answer is the responsibility for every last one of us, regardless of our giftings.
Yeah. So what about for these giftings? What are some of those pitfalls or signs that you are not in the healthiest place that can kind of showcase themselves in the different giftings?
I can walk down the list really quick, and then we can just talk through personal experiences.
Okay.
For the apostle, where it gets a little dangerous is when you're building at all cost, and what you end up doing is in your build, you're leaving a trail of people behind you who are broken and shattered. And unfortunately, that's one of the reasons why so many people are almost a little intimidated by the gift of the apostle, is because they've seen that in such an unhealthy way in the church and out the church. Many of us have worked for those bosses who care so much about the bottom line that they're willing to just, they don't care about your family life, they don't care about what's happening, they're willing to risk you for the sake of the thing they're building. For the prophet gets their voice and the voice of God confused. And often, again, I love the way that Sherry said that, because a prophet who's unhealthy will also lose sight of methodology. And you start hearing things like, well, I'm the prophet, I have this gifting of the prophet, so I'm just going to say what's on my heart, and I'm not going to take a moment to consider how people are hearing that. I think that that's unhealthy. For the evangelists, we influence for things that don't matter. We become obsessed about secondary things, and we forget that the thing is Jesus. And then for the shepherd, the danger becomes they become more fascinated with people needing them versus them pointing the people who they shepherd to Jesus. Unfortunately, shepherds often need a lot of shepherding themselves. A lot of times the reason you're a good shepherd is because you can sense and know the heartbeat of the sheep, right? Like you know what it's like to need. There is a little bit of an unhealth when it becomes, now I need to be needed, versus how do I point people to Jesus? And for the teacher, sometimes we can become haughty with our education and pretend like we have insight and keys to things because of our, our educational pursuit, or because we're just such good people, and we can become prideful in what we know. And instead of using the knowledge that God has given us to help others, we become very much people of pedestals, and we're looking for people to elevate us. And we forget that it's Him who gets elevated. So that's just a really quick list of some of the unhealthy traits of this gifting.
I would say it's convicting all around.
Amen. I'm glad I stepped on everyone's toes.
Do you guys have thoughts specifically towards your gifts?
Well, certainly that like I shared on Sunday, I've got opinions on everything. I suffer from a surplus of opinions. You need an opinion? I got one for you. And so it's like
Pineapple on pizza. Okay.
2 thumbs up.
Just wanted to test.
Anchovies. And so, yeah, you want to know what you want? You want my input? I got input. But did I stop and pray? And so on. And even worse, we can get a step further unhealthy if we make a little g God of our own preferences.
Let's go.
Like,
Preach a word.
not only do I not, if I say didn't want pineapple on my pizza, right? Well, you shouldn't have it either.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a silly example, but we can think of others.
Sometimes silly examples help.
Yeah.
Yes, they-
Or,
No,
gee, I don't know. That makes me a little uncomfortable. I think I won't do it. Right? Like, I won't go beyond some of these comfort things, these preference things. And I'm clever enough to dress it up in really pretty language. So, y'all keep me honest. Don't let me get away with that.
Yeah, I do think for specifically the prophet, one of the temptations is to allow secondary issues to bring division. And instead of a preference being, oh, that's unique, it's a preference. And what we'll find, again, knowing that when we talk about secondary versus primary issues, there's no moving on primary issues. But when it comes to secondary issues within the scope of even culturally, there's a lot that we learn, that we glean, that become beautiful when we bring these differences to a table. And instead what's happening now is, no, my preference and your preference, we're going to allow that to create dividing lines, and we're separating. I mean, and unfortunately, that is an abuse in a lot of those who are gifted as in that area of the prophet.
Yeah, I think for me, with my personal experience of being a shepherd, I think because you are always valuing the other person and thinking about the other person, sometimes I am unwilling to at times go deeper into that like spiritual conversation because you're afraid, like, what will they think of me? Like, what will they do? Am I going to make someone uncomfortable? And so I think that's, for me, is the biggest like trip up that I will get in as a shepherd is that you want to go deeper with someone, you want to make that connection, you want to try to dive into that level, but you might just I don't know, like you just have something that holds you back. And one of the things that I've found that helps with this, and again, I'm not perfect at this by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously when appropriate, is if I am like vulnerable about something first, and then that can kind of help like steer the conversation and make it go. So I'm kind of shepherding myself with that and preaching to myself with that one.
Love
it is something that I think can be really helpful.
I will say for shepherds, one of the warnings is we can quickly become people pleasers. And now we're obsessed with the way that people perceive us. And it's tough to really shepherd at a high quality if you're concerned with what people are constantly thinking. So that can be dangerous too.
I think for me personally, I have to keep people's growth in mind because it can be my natural kind of nurturing instinct to only offer that like comforting shoulder, which is absolutely appropriate in a lot of times. But sometimes I can get to the point where I realize I'm kind of crippling people and not allowing them to grow and heal, which takes some discomfort and some pain because I'm trying to step in and take that away. And just like any broken bone, like you got to rehab it afterwards. And so that's one of the things that I'm just being challenged by the Lord in right now to keep that in mind.
That picture of a shepherd is your rod and staff, it comforts me. And we like to shepherd without the rod and staff. And there are times where that rod and staff are necessary to set direction. And if we truly love people, but again, if I'm concerned with how you feel about me, there are moments where I will, step back from the controversial, step back from that thing that I think may rise something up in you when it may be necessary.
Yeah. We had a comment come in that says it seems like any of the giftings could be tempted to get stuck on secondary issues and forget that the purpose is Jesus, and I absolutely agree. I think that's just a cultural temptation right now, and so it comes into play. However,
well, and even the giftings, there are those who would say, "Oh, well, they're very apostolic in their giftings. I've been hurt by that, so now I'm going to shy away from people of that gifting instead of sitting in the middle of that." So even that can be divisive and a preference that separates us.
Yeah. A couple more questions. Time's going fast.
It is.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but how have you experienced working alongside or doing life alongside people with different gifts in ministry and just in life?
I love it. Coming together and working with someone who has those different gifts and like letting them work in their strengths and I work in mine, it's like, it's interesting. When Center City was first starting, David Dickinson is like here on apostolic. Can I tell my story about the helium balloons?
I think so.
Okay. So whatever role I had, I don't remember the name of it at the moment, maybe operational, something or another. But I was kind of looking at a lot of practical stuff. Like we have this much space, we have these many volunteers, et cetera. And David has idea after idea after idea, and they're all good. And they're all like, yeah, we should do that. Oh my goodness, how? And we had conversations along those lines a lot. And I finally said, David, when you're in the grocery store and you're in the checkout line and they have the helium balloons, did you ever look at the other end of the string? What's keeping those helium balloons in place is a really big, heavy plastic star. And at this time in my life, I am the heavy plastic star to keep the balloon where we want it, where it needs to be. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great picture of how those gifts work together, and the person with the apostolic gift needs the prophetic, needs the shepherd, needs some of those people like, okay, if we're going to go with you, then we can't get too high too fast. But then also we sometimes need to be carried along and like shoot for the
occasionally
stars.
It was like, nope, we're going. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, no, I said I have none of the apostolic within me, and that's definitely true. But I think one of the things that I've learned with like working with someone who has ideas, and if I can use the golf example again, I'm serious. Like whenever Dominique Patterson was talking to me about this idea, I was like, I don't know about that. That's a lot of planning. That's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things we got to do there. But whenever we got through it, we finished it. We did everything. We got so many good compliments and so many. I don't know. Like it was just such a rewarding experience. I was just like, man, like I'm really glad that we actually ended up doing that. And I think it's those kinds of experiences where like your first initial reaction is, this is someone with a different gifting. I don't know how to handle this. But then when you kind of press through it, and sometimes it's messy, but you get to the other side and you're like, I'm actually really glad I did that. And so I think kind of building on those experiences can really help too.
That's good. I think ultimately to work together collectively, there's a couple key ingredients. Number one is humility, because every one of those gifts when you add pride to the equation, like it could ruin the whole thing. A prideful apostolic leader struggles with a prideful shepherd. Like that tension becomes ugly. I actually feel like I try my hardest to make sure in our leadership structure that those gifts are represented. I find it difficult to sit in teams where everybody is the same gifting, because I want the shepherd to say, hey, we need to slow down and consider. I want the evangelist to say, but we haven't told anybody yet. And I want the apostolic leader to say, that's great, but we tried that already. Here's a new idea. And then it requires the teacher to say that, all of that just seems way too complicated. Have we thought about saying it this way? Like, in every one of those giftings, if there's pride, it has a tendency of mucking up the system. So I would say, number one, the key ingredient is it's got to be humility. And then number two, clear communication across the board. Expectations are critical. You got to know. That's why, like for us, up until recently, because somebody erased it, like on our whiteboard, we literally
At least
had...
like a year ago, it was just noticed recently.
Yeah, but when we first, and literally when I first came...
5 years ago.
5 years ago, we actually all took the test, and then I made sure that test was available. We put everybody's giftings on the wall, and there are seasons where it's like, hey, as an apostolic leader, I have this new idea, and it involves caring for people. Let me grab that leader and move them into the space where I can start asking them questions, creating structure, run things by them from the heart of a shepherd, right? So when we were contemplating groups, I knew Ashley had the shepherding heart. So it makes sense to place that under her purview. And to me, that's the beauty of the church. When there's clear communication and humility, we collectively can come together and form the walls of this thing called the church and echo the glory of Jesus in the dark places.
Yeah. I just keep thinking, I think some of this is my personality, but some of this is also kind of what we're told culturally, is that we need to be everything and we need to develop every skill, every talent, every gift for ourselves. And the reality of the different gifts is that I can breathe a sigh of relief and both honor and celebrate the way that God has gifted me, and also honor and celebrate that He's gifted other people in these areas where I'm weak, and I don't have to feel that tension of, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out how to develop my apostolic because I need to have all 5 of these at 100%, and instead recognize God gave us each other because He wants us to need each other, so that we can't do it all on our own. And so for me, there might be those moments of tension, but for the most part, it's a sigh of relief of I don't have to be perfect at all of these because He gave me teammates. And so I can be thankful and use my gifts well, because you also don't want to it's really just pride to do the false humility and oh, God's given me this gift, but I'm not going to use it. That's not humility. But then also to just appreciate and celebrate the other people who also represent things that I'm not gifted in.
Yeah.
Okay. One question. This is actually the first question that came in for the night, but I decided to end on it. And I think this person's going to be disappointed because they said no cop-outs, but they're going to think the answer is a cop-out. Which gift is the best pick? The best gift, if you had to pick, no cop-outs.
Well, naturally, I think the best gift, if I have to pick, is the one that I'm the highest rated at. So,
I was going to say shepherd. I think you're outnumbered.
Yeah.
3.
I honestly think the reality is that all of it together is the best gift. I know that sounds like a cop-out. I won't look directly at the person. But they can't be separated because all of them are God's gifts for the equipping of the church. But I appreciate the humor in the question.
I'm obsessed with the beauty of it. I really am. Even in structure, as a new believer, if you're in this room or watching as a new believer, to know that God intimately designed each of us to need each other. As a seasoned saint in this room, it should get you excited to think that 19 and 20 and 25-year-olds are figuring out how they fit in this thing, and that your gift is appreciated and needed. And ultimately, if everybody had the gifting of the apostles, nobody sees Jesus. If everybody had the gifting of the evangelists, nobody sees Jesus. But because we are all each of us uniquely gifted, Jesus is seen. And I just, the fact that that's what I get to do with my life, that I get to be, I know this is just adding too many metaphors. There's metaphors like crazy, but I'm a tech junkie, and one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is by LED walls, because LED wall technology has changed over the years. And years ago, it was like each pixel was like 2 inches. They were huge, and you can tell from a distance that the picture was all blocky. But now these pixels are getting really, really, really small, and these LED walls just radiate these beautiful pictures. Except, let 2 or 3 of those things be out, and it just drives you nuts. It just drives you crazy. It's like, but what is happening? And I think there are moments where I think that the small amount of prophetic in me is very much like, no, you need to glow in your giftings so that when they look, they see him in his fullness and in his glory. And it's not about you as an individual, but when you're not there, when you're not showcasing that gifting, there is moments where I just want to come up behind you and say, come on, you can do it. We can do this. Look, collectively, this is the picture we get to paint.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's a new LED screen at Bank of America Stadium, just FYI.
Oh, yeah, we
drove
saw that
past it today.
And it seems like it's in a pointless spot. So me and Joey were contemplating how to cut it down and put it on our backstage wall.
I don't think it would fit in this building.
I'm just kidding, man. That's a joke, David Tepper. I'm not trying to steal your LEDs.
Unless you want to give them to us.
Amen.
So where are we headed?
So what's the sense of talking about giftings if we don't talk about generosity? My mom growing up had those dishes that you didn't use. You know what I'm saying? They're so pretty that you don't use them. And I always felt so disheartened. I don't ever want to be the dish that doesn't get used. I'm not accomplishing my purpose. I might look pretty, but all I'm doing is collecting dust. So at the end of the day, it's generosity of time, talent, and treasures that utilizes the gifts that God has placed in the church. So it is, we do spend time talking through what that looks like as it pertains to our finances. We talk about what that looks like as it pertains to our time and our treasures, which is basically our gifting, and how we can be that engine. This is the fuel to the vehicle. It's great to have a brand new Tesla, but when that thing hits 0%, it's just sitting there. You need juice, and the juice to the church is our generosity and our willingness to give of our time, of our talents or giftings, and of our treasures, our finances. So I'm excited about it. It's one of my favorite messages all year.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So we'll be back 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday, streaming online at 11. We would love to see you then.
Woo! Cool.